Society always thinks of police officers, prosecutors, judges, lawyers, and teachers as having high moral standards and idealized images. For instance, police officers are seen as embodiments of justice, and teachers are regarded as disseminators of knowledge and guides of morality. However, real life is far more complex than this idealized picture. It's important not to get too caught up in the prestige of any profession. In any field, there will always be people who fail to meet the standards and break the rules. Some police officers will take bribes while some teachers will mistreat their students. Norbert Hans Poehlke was a police officer who not only killed 3 innocent victims but also murdered his entire family. There are various speculations about his motives for the killings. Some people believe that it was his overwhelming debt that led him down this path. Others speculate that his daughter's brain tumor was the cause, and that being unable to afford her treatment plunged him into despair and agony. But whatever his motives may be, he must be held fully accountable for his crimes. On September 15, 1951, Norbert was born into an ordinary family in Stuttgart, West Germany. It is said that his parents had fled from East Germany to West Germany. This experience left the family rather unpopular in society, where they were labeled as indecent. In those days, prices in West Germany were soaring, food supplies were scarce, housing conditions were poor, and unemployment and homelessness were common. In order to ease the family's financial burden, children often took part-time jobs after school, such as delivering newspapers. Although Norbert's childhood life was not disclosed, his life was similar to this way. In 1968, after Norbert's parents divorced, he moved with his mother to Strumpfelbach, Baden-Württemberg, where he tried to become a business apprentice but was eventually dismissed for his repeated unexplained absences. Time flew by and soon it was 1971. At 20 years old, Norbert stood at a crossroads. After some contemplation, he decided to become a police officer. He threw himself into the job, and his dedication was quickly rewarded with a series of promotions. In his spare time, Norbert also found love. He married a gentle and kind-hearted wife and had 2 sons, leading an ordinary life. The police officer had a particular habit. Every time he passed by a lottery shop on his way home from work, he would buy a ticket. Having grown up in poverty, Norbert always harbored dreams of turning small bets into big wins. In the early 1980s, he won the lottery, a prize of 30,000 marks. Back then, the winnings were enough to buy an apartment near the city. Not long after, Norbert's wife also gave birth to a daughter. Then, the money and the arrival of his daughter sparked an idea in Norbert's mind. In reality, he had always harbored a dream of building a house of his own. The lottery winnings and his growing family fueled his desire to realize this dream. He eagerly began to plan the construction and prepared to move his family to the countryside. However, once the house was completed, Norbert had not only exhausted all the lottery money, but also used up the loan he had taken from the bank, leaving him with a debt of 300,000 marks. The huge debt loomed over him like a mountain, plunging him into an unprecedented predicament. Although in 1982 he was transferred to Mühlhausen am Neckar's Canine Division as a high-ranking sergeant, his salary increased, but it was merely a drop in the bucket, far from enough to repay his debts. Later, in March 1984, another disaster struck the already heavily indebted family. His daughter, a 3-year-old girl, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Faced with exorbitant medical expenses, Norbert was unable to pay. He could only watch helplessly as his daughter passed away in agony. And this event had a devastating impact on this family and became the turning point for Norbert's descent into crime. Firstly, Norbert's salary was entirely insufficient to cover his huge financial gap. He needed money, a large amount of money, to prevent his life from collapsing. However, legitimate means could not meet his urgent needs. Thus, he made a reckless decision to rob banks. As a police officer who had worked in the area for a decade, he was intimately familiar with everything there. He knew every street and corner and was thoroughly familiar with police procedures and investigation methods. But to carry out this plan, he had to be flawless, leaving no useful clues behind. He had a weapon and an escape route, so what he needed was a car. One car that did not belong to himself and anyone he knew. So, how to get a stranger's car? Theft? Norbert chose a method that was both simple and extreme. On May 3, 1984, he lingered near a highway rest stop in the Marbach area, waiting for the right person to carry out his plan. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, a car pulled into the gas station. The car's owner was a sales engineer named Siegfried. After stopping the car, he opened the door and stepped out to refuel. However, Norbert pulled out a gun from behind his back and, without warning, shot Siegfried in the face. He grabbed a hammer, shattered Siegfried's car window, climbed into the vehicle, started it, and drove away from the scene. Not long after, someone discovered Siegfried's body with a gunshot wound to the face and found his car was gone. Around 12:25 that same morning, Norbert arrived at a bank in Erbstetten. There, he broke the counter window with a hammer and stole 5,000 marks. Although the bank staff managed to activate the alarm, Norbert had already fled in panic before the police arrived. In the days following the robbery, the bank employees endeavored to recall the perpetrator's physical characteristics. They described him as a man between 35 and 40 years old, with straight light brown hair, tall and slender, and dressed in a blue suit. Meanwhile, investigators collected bloodstains from the bank, which were left behind when Norbert injured his hand while smashing the counter window. After the robbery, the police discovered an abandoned car a few hundred meters from the scene of Siegfried's death, and not long after, it was identified as his car. However, certain key details aroused the suspicion of the police, leading them to suspect the bank robber was likely also Siegfried's murderer. The car had mysteriously disappeared before the robbery and then reappeared after the robbery. Moreover, both the bank counter window and the car window were shattered with a hammer. As time went on, the police established a special investigative committee comprising 20 top investigators to focus on the case. They also issued a public warning, urging everyone to be vigilant, as the murderer was likely to use a firearm ruthlessly. However, despite an extensive investigation, the police still failed to apprehend the murderer. 5,000 marks were a mere drop in the ocean compared to Norbert's debt of 300,000. Sensing that the police investigation had hit a dead end, he turned to crime once more. In December of the same year, Wevy, a 37-year-old British expatriate living in Nuremberg, was resting at the parking lot in Großbutt. He was preparing to travel to Switzerland to spend Christmas with his parents, but on the way, he was attacked and killed by a stranger. Obviously, the murderer was Norbert, who had initially intended only to steal Wevy's car. Compared to his first crime, he took more time to conceal the body, dragging Wevy's remains to a nearby grove and covering them with leaves. A week later, he used the stolen vehicle in a bank robbery in Kleebron, from which he made off with 79,000 marks. Several days after the robbery, a passerby discovered Wevy's body. During the investigation, the police found a crucial clue, a cartridge case nearly identical to the one from Siegfried's murder. It is well known, each bullet is like a unique footprint left at the crime scene, imparting specific marks and grooves on its trajectory. The ballistics department, well aware of this, conducted an extensive analysis, examining over 12,000 weapon models in an attempt to find the key clue. In those days, the investigation mounted by the German police was unprecedented. They mobilized a significant number of officers to conduct a thorough investigation of 1,400 individuals, questioning them about possible involvement. Despite the extensive scope, no one fully matched the witness description of the murderer. But, fortunately, investigators got obtained several promising leads. The murderer killed to obtain a car for a quick getaway after the robbery. He used a hammer to break into vehicles and bank windows, not to harm people, which indicated that his purpose was very clear. He just wanted money. In addition, the weapon used in all the killings was the same, a standard pistol widely used by the West German police and security personnel. Obviously, the murderer had connections within the police or security personnel. On July 22, 1985, Wilfried, a 27-year-old electrician, was found dead, his death identical to that of the previous victims. On the very same day, Norbert struck again, attempting to rob a bank. However, this time he was unsuccessful because the bank was surrounded by police. His plan was foiled, forcing him to flee in panic. Wilfried's death had the police on edge. As time went on, an unsettling rumor began to spread. The serial killer was likely a police officer. Amidst this tense atmosphere, the police even mistakenly arrested an Italian agent. In 1985, West Germany saw over 1,600 politically motivated bombings, arson attacks, murders, and other violent crimes. On September 29th, a bomb threat was reported at the Ludwigsburg railway station. While searching for bombs, the police found a police uniform in a locker, stained with blood. Later, the uniform was traced to Detective Chief Superintendent Norbert, a police officer of 14 years in Stuttgart. When questioned about why the uniform was left there, Norbert replied that he had attended a funeral. However, after investigating his whereabouts, they found that he had not attended any funeral recently. The only funeral he had attended was in 1984, his daughter's, who had died of a brain tumor. On October 14th, Norbert applied for sick leave. Several days later, the police arrived at his house, intending to question him about the murders and robberies. When they knocked on the door, there was no response. Fearing that Norbert might have fled, they forcibly entered. However, the sight inside shocked all the officers. Norbert's wife was lying in the bathroom, shot twice in the head, and his son, Adrian, was found dead in one of the bedrooms. On October 23rd, 3 days later, Norbert and his other son were found dead in a car at a village near Brindisi, Italy. Later, it was confirmed that Norbert's pistol was the murder weapon used in the killings, and the deaths of him and his family were ruled as suicide. With this, the case was finally closed. In the end, although Norbert's tragedy had come to an end, his name and his story remained in the places he had hurt.